Hello and welcome to this new video. Today I will tell you why Meta experienced such a crash after such good quarterly results and why we expect another correction of more than 50%. Then I will show you the current market situation. After that, we will take a look at the general metadata, and finally, we'll get to my price targets and where we are headed. Let's get started, and a warm welcome to this new video. I want to start this video with a report. The financial markets are behaving quite oppositely. Meta exceeds expectations but falls by 10%. Tesla fails to meet expectations and rises by 10%. Even with the indices, where I discussed the Nasdaq in the past two videos, things look quite strange. As we can see here, the market is currently very psychologically driven. So not rational as it should be, but psychological. The market heavily prices in future targets. When Tesla announced they would release a new model, it was heavily priced in, and when Meta released their forecasts for the next quarter, they did not anticipate strong growth. The stock market heavily prices in the future, so it's important to have a reliable channel like this one that you trust. And yes, now let's look at Meta's general data, specifically the quarterly results. Q24 earnings. Revenue increased by 27% to $36.5 billion. Gross profit increased from $29.8 billion, a 32% increase. EBIT rose to $13.8 billion, and net income increased to $12.4 billion. That looks very good. Ideally, after these results, a rational person would have expected a 20% increase, but I'll show later in my course why we didn't see that. Now let's look at the user numbers. Meta doesn't report individual users, but instead reports daily active users as a family of apps. 40% of the world's population uses Meta's products, indicating a very strong moat. A moat with growth is an excellent combination. Now let's take a look at Meta's general financial data and future prospects. In summary, Meta's finances and balance sheet look very clean, and analysts anticipate continued strong growth. However, there is a small issue. There have been insider sales in the last 3 months. We'll examine this more closely. Let's compare the stock with other major tech giants. Other major tech companies like Netflix, Microsoft, Apple, and Alphabet all have a higher PE ratio. Meta has only 24.6, with an earnings growth of 12.2%. This month, it's more about comparing the growth from 2023. The fair PE ratio for Meta is 40, but there will be a cooling off before it really takes off, where we'll see several 100% growth. Compared to its competitors, Meta is quite cheap. Now let's look at the growth prospects of earnings and revenue. The average of analysts' estimates is calculated. It is expected that we will have a fairly strong year. And if the other quarters are as convincing as this week, then we'll also see much higher revenues than expected. That's just the analysts' average. I estimate Meta's revenues and earnings much higher. Now let's also look at the balance sheets. Meta has $18.4 billion in debt. This shouldn't be a problem because their cash flow is quite all right and they can repay the debt. This is not a problem for Meta. And it shouldn't be seen as important because the cash is $58 billion and the total assets are valued at $222 billion. The balance sheet actually looks very good. And then let's look at the dividends. I could imagine that they will increase their dividend in the coming years. It would also be suitable for a dividend portfolio because they could increase the dividend and buy back their own shares. It would also grow well compared to the market. Meta belongs in almost any type of portfolio. Let's also take a look at the insider sales. The total value of insider sales was not too much, only a few million US dollars in value, which I find really low compared to the market capitalization. Mark Zuckerberg is a very competent CEO, and I can really trust him a lot, especially if you've read his history. Now let's look at the largest shareholders. Mark Zuckerberg still holds the most shares percentage-wise with almost 14%. Then come the famous asset managers like Vanguard, BlackRock, including iShares, and also a few hedge funds and investment companies. And now let's briefly see which hedge fund managers hold Meta stock. Now let's look at the big traders, the people like Warren Buffett or the major hedge funds. As we can see here, most of them have reduced their positions significantly. Some have reduced by more than 10%, which is really substantial. The individuals doing this are professional investors who outperformed the market last year, like the management at Tiger Global Management. This management holds the majority of the shares in the fund, totaling $2.6 billion in value. Last quarter, they sold off 16.8% of their positions and are currently sitting on a profit of 163.1%. They are one of the best performing funds in recent years. In their portfolio, they also have investments in Microsoft and Apollo Global Management. If you want videos about these stocks, you can also leave a comment. They need to be particularly careful because the Meta stock constitutes 20% of their portfolio. And yes, now let's take a look at my exact price targets. I myself own Meta shares. I bought in this target zone and I am also very much in profit. Because Meta has constituted a significant portion of my portfolio after some time, I sold a portion of my shares and went short with a portion, and with another portion, I invested in other assets such as Bitcoin. If you're still hesitant to buy Bitcoin, watch my second to last video where I explain everything thoroughly. I'm currently short on Meta to maintain my performance, but long term, I am very bullish. One hedges oneself with a few simple tricks. With a small portion of my short position, I also use leverage. I set up my short position at around $500 and have approximately realized gains of around 11%, but I have set a small take profit at 422.5, and I have already realized profits because it touched my target range. There, I sold my leverage positions to minimize my risk. I have achieved a profit of 15.5% without leverage calculation, but I think we will touch the old all-time high as we will build up a resistance zone. Then there will be a 20% recovery. And after we've seen it, we will have one last strong correction, which can correct between $182 and $306 in a very unlikely scenario. It could even correct down to $140. My assessment of the turning point in price is at $250, where I would buy very heavily, but I would also buy at the other zones. It would then be very interesting for traders with high leverage, so we still have a downward potential of at least 30%, and up to the lower edge, which I don't think will happen, it's almost 70%. Probably, however, there will be a further correction of 45%. I will see if when we find the first bottom, I will make another video for the next target zone. So leave a like and comment for that so I can see you're interested in it. Then we will continue to rise. For people who still want to go short, the risk to reward ratio is currently too high as it can still increase by about 18%, if not a bit more. The reward side is, of course, much more, but using leverage for that I find very risky. Everyone should decide for themselves. This is not investment advice. The correction could extend until the next quarter. After the correction, we will see very strong short-term gains, which will make several 100%. Now let's take a look at my long-term outlook. From a long-term perspective, Meta is one of the best stocks with relatively low risk and a significant moat. Once we've seen the correction, I would consider the stock a value investment, as Warren Buffett would describe it. The short-term increases from this point could be at least 94% to 182%. It could even expand further. The short-term targets are very conservative. For those who think I invest long-term, I can easily withstand a 50% correction. Actually, enduring it is not suitable for everyone, and currently there are better stocks that also look very promising for the long term. Naturally, there will be videos on these stocks, or you can also write stocks you find interesting in the comments. You can revisit and buy Meta stock if you invest monthly in 3 months. Why am I saying this? After the correction, you can realize at least 3 times more profit than if you were to buy now. How much would that be? At least 242%, but it's likely to be 400% or more. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want more analyses, write it in the comments, and until next time.